This video is going to cover something that very few people talk about openly, and the ones who do usually get it wrong. It is a topic that sits at the intersection of faith, community structure, biology, and deeply held cultural values. It is not something I ever expected to be sitting here discussing on camera, but I have found that the things nobody wants to talk about directly are often the things most worth understanding. My name is Sarah. I am a former Amish woman from Pennsylvania. I left my community as a young adult, and I want to be honest with you from the beginning. What I am going to share today is not gossip, and it is not an attempt to make my community look bad. This is a genuine educational look at how a deeply traditional culture approaches human reproduction, courtship, marriage, and family formation. Everything I share is grounded in documented cultural practice, academic research, and my own lived experience. The goal is understanding. So let us start at the very beginning, because to understand how Amish communities think about reproduction and family formation, you have to understand what children mean inside that culture at a foundational level. In the Amish worldview, children are not a lifestyle choice. They are not a decision you make when you feel financially ready or emotionally prepared. Children are considered a direct blessing from God, and having many of them is understood as both a natural consequence of a faithful marriage and a form of obedience. The Amish do not require members to have as many children as biologically possible, and there is no explicit formal rule about family size written in the Ordnung. But the cultural expectation is unmistakable, and the numbers reflect it clearly. According to research documented at Elizabethtown College and confirmed through population data cited by Wikipedia and Amish America, the average Amish family has between 6 and 7 children. The North American Amish population has grown by over 130% since the year 2000, rising from roughly 178,000 people to over 400,000 by 2025. That population doubles approximately every 20 years. This is one of the fastest organic population growth rates of any identifiable cultural group in the United States. This growth is not accidental. It is the biological result of a culture that treats family formation as sacred, begins reproduction early in adult life, and historically discourages contraception. Amish America has documented that while no specific biblical prohibition against birth control exists in Amish teaching, traditional Amish communities frown on its use and view it as interfering with God's will. In practice, some Amish couples, particularly those in more progressive New Order communities or in cases where medical need exists, do use some forms of family planning. But in more conservative Old Order districts, large families remain the strong norm and the cultural expectation. Now let us talk about how young Amish people learn about any of this, because this is where my own experience becomes very relevant. The honest answer is that formal education about human biology and reproduction does not exist in Amish communities. Elizabethtown College's Amish Studies program, one of the most respected academic resources on Amish culture in the country, has documented directly that science and sex education are not typically taught in Amish schools. Amish children attend 1 or 2 room private schools through the 8th grade, at which point formal schooling ends. The curriculum focuses on practical subjects, Pennsylvania Dutch language, English, basic arithmetic, and biblical principles. Human biology in a clinical or educational sense is not part of it. What young people learn about human reproduction, they learn indirectly. From watching animals on the farm, from observing the pregnancies that are a regular and visible part of community life, because with families of 6 or 7 children, someone is almost always expecting, from older siblings and peers, and from whatever their parents choose to tell them, which in many households is very little. A common cultural understanding exists that the body and its functions are private, not discussed openly, and that young people will learn what they need to know when the time comes through marriage. Pregnancy itself is treated as a private matter within the community. Amish America has noted that while Amish people do discuss pregnancy, they do so in a more restrained way than mainstream American culture. There are no baby showers posted on social media, no public gender reveal moments, no detailed announcements. A pregnancy is acknowledged within the family and close community, but not broadcast or discussed openly in public gatherings. This is rooted in the same principle of humility and privacy that governs so much of Amish daily life. Now let us talk about courtship, because this is where the culture becomes genuinely fascinating from an anthropological perspective, and where what happens on the surface and what happens underneath, it can be quite different. Amish courtship typically begins around age 16, which is when young people enter a period known as Romspringa, Rumspringa is a Pennsylvania Dutch word that translates loosely as running around. It is a period of greater social freedom that begins at the age of maturity and ends when a young person decides whether to be baptized and commit to the Amish church or leave. During Rumspringa, young people attend Sunday night singings, which are community gatherings where hymns are sung and where young men and women have the opportunity to interact in a supervised social setting. This is often where a first romantic connection is made. According to Ohio Amish Country's documentation of this tradition, dating typically begins when a young man offers a young woman a ride home after one of these singings. Courtship in Amish communities is generally kept private. Couples do not publicize their relationship. The community may observe and speculate, but the couple does not announce they are courting. This privacy is intentional and reflects the cultural value of keeping personal matters within the family rather than making them community business. In some communities, particularly among the more conservative Swartzentruber Amish and certain Old Order groups, a historical courtship practice called bundling exists, and I want to explain this carefully because it is frequently misunderstood or sensationalized from the outside. Bundling, also called bed courtship, is a practice in which a courting couple spends time together in a bedroom setting with the understanding that physical boundaries are to be maintained. Saloma Miller Furlong, a well-known Amish author and former Amish woman who has written and spoken extensively about Amish courtship traditions, has documented this practice in detail from her own experience. She traces its origins to the Anabaptist communities in Switzerland and Germany, where persecuted ancestors would hide in upper rooms, and couples would spend time together there for warmth and privacy. The tradition carried over into early American Amish settlements, where sleeping spaces were not as private or available as they are today. It is important to understand what this practice is and what it is not. It is not considered acceptable within the cultural framework for the couple to have intercourse during this time. However, as Furlong and other sources have documented, the boundaries of bundling are not always maintained, and premarital pregnancy does occur in Amish communities. When it does, the response is typically to accelerate the path toward marriage. Baptism is required before marriage in the Amish church, and if a couple is not yet baptized, the process can be accelerated by attending instruction classes in 2 different church districts simultaneously, reducing the normal timeline from a full season to roughly half that time. This practical solution reflects how the community handles the situation without formal public scandal if it can be avoided. The question of marriage itself deserves careful attention because marriage in the Amish context is unlike anything most modern people have experienced or can easily imagine. You must be baptized into the church before you can marry within it. This is not just a religious formality, it is a deeply consequential commitment. When you are baptized as an Amish adult, you are making a vow before God and your entire community that you will live by the Ordnung for the rest of your life. You are choosing the community, the rules, the structure, and all that comes with it. Choosing not to be baptized means choosing not to marry within the community, which means in practical terms, leaving behind everyone and everything you have ever known. This connection between baptism and marriage is one of the most powerful mechanisms for community retention that exists in Amish culture. It means that the decision to formally commit to faith and the decision to form a family are inseparable. For young people who have grown up in this environment, who have been raised inside this community their entire lives and whose entire social world exists within it, the pull toward baptism and marriage is enormous. The Amish do not sanction divorce. This is one of the most absolute positions in Amish religious teaching. Divorce is considered grounds for excommunication from the church, which means shunning, which means separation from your family, your friends, your entire community, and your support system. According to Amish America's documented research, Amish consider wedding vows to be binding for life. Separations do occur in practice, and the community is not entirely without mechanisms for handling difficult marriages. But a formal divorce, particularly for a baptized member, carries the full weight of church discipline. This creates a reality that researchers and former Amish community members have both noted, which is that marriage is entered into with a finality that modern culture does not typically assign to it. Once you are in, the structure of the entire community reinforces staying in. Childbirth itself is another area where Amish practice differs significantly from mainstream American life. The large majority of Amish women give birth at home with the assistance of a midwife. This is documented across multiple sources, including Amish America, academic nursing research, and first-hand accounts from midwives who serve Amish communities. Home birth is preferred for reasons of cost, comfort, cultural familiarity, and a general preference for keeping the birthing experience within the family and community rather than within a hospital system. Amish women have been noted in clinical studies to have lower rates of underweight babies and no higher rates of premature birth than the general population, according to research published and cited by Lancaster Online. The use of pain medication during labor is not typical in traditional communities. The pace of childbearing in many Amish families is consistent and begins shortly after marriage. Because contraception is culturally discouraged, most Amish couples who marry in their early 20s will have their first child within the first year or two of marriage and continue to have children throughout the wife's reproductive years. This is not experienced within the community as a burden in the way that an outside observer might assume. With a community structure that actively supports large families, where grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors are physically present and involved, and where the social expectation is built around this pattern from childhood, many Amish women genuinely embrace their roles as mothers of large families with a sense of purpose and community, belonging that is hard to quantify from the outside. That said, I want to be honest about what is more complicated. I know women from my community who were exhausted, who loved their children deeply, but who found the relentless pace of childbearing and child-rearing without the option of meaningful spacing through family planning, physically and emotionally wearing. Women who had 10 or 11 pregnancies over the course of their marriages. Women whose bodies showed the evidence of that. The community honors motherhood in ways that are genuine and meaningful. But honoring motherhood does not make the physical reality of repeated pregnancy and childbirth easier on any individual woman's body. There is also the matter of what young people are not told. I grew up with very little formal knowledge of my own reproductive biology. I learned what I learned from older girls, from what I observed on the farm, and eventually from experience. The silence around these subjects was not malicious, it was cultural. Bodies were private, reproduction was God's domain. You did not discuss it in explicit or educational terms because the explicit and educational were considered worldly intrusions into something sacred. The result of that silence is that young people, and particularly young women, enter courtship and marriage with very limited information about their own bodies, about the mechanics of reproduction, about what pregnancy will actually involve. That gap between cultural expectation and personal knowledge is something that many former Amish women, myself included, have had to fill years after leaving, often on our own. What I want you to take from this is not a judgment of Amish culture. Every culture shapes human reproduction through its own values, and every culture has both wisdom and blind spots in how it does that. What the Amish have built is a community that genuinely values children, that supports large families through real social infrastructure, and that treats marriage and family formation with a seriousness that modern culture sometimes lacks entirely. What they have also built is a system in which the individual, and particularly the individual woman, has very limited access to information and very limited structural support for making different choices. The two things exist simultaneously. Both of them are real. Understanding that complexity, honestly, is, I think, more respectful to the people who live inside that culture than either romanticizing it or condemning it. I spent the first chapter of my life inside it. I am still figuring out what I think about all of it, and I believe that conversation is worth having out loud.